Welcome to Edge of Known. We investigate the phenomena science still can't fully explain, documented anomalies, data that challenges consensus, and the boundaries of what we understand about the cosmos, the mind, and life itself. Every video cites the studies and the researchers. What you do with the information is up to you. In 1994, the Swiss neurologist Peter Brugger and his colleagues at the University Hospital of Zürich published a paper in the journal Cortex. It described a patient with temporal lobe epilepsy who, during a seizure, saw an exact double of himself. He believed the double was real. He believed the double was about to abandon him, and he tried to jump from a window to follow it. The patient survived. He later described calmly what he had seen. The clinical name for this experience is autoscopy. It belongs to a family of perceptions called autoscopic phenomena, documented in medical literature for over a century. None of them is fully explained. In this video, we are counting down 8 peer-reviewed cases where patients encountered an exact replica of themselves. The clinical literature calls these autoscopic phenomena. They appear in epilepsy, in stroke, in tumor patients, occasionally in healthy people under extreme stress. Every case here has a paper. Every paper has authors and an institution. We will move from how the word doppelganger entered medicine, through 3 decades of European neurological case series, to a homicide trial in 2022, where a man was killed by someone he believed was his double. Number 8 first. Number 8, the word itself. The term doppelganger was coined in 1796 by the German novelist Jean Paul in his book Siebenkäse. It is a compound word, doppel meaning double, ganger meaning walker, a walker who is your double. The concept predates Jean Paul by centuries in European folklore, but he was the first to give it a single name. Within decades, the word migrated out of literature and into medicine. Goethe, in his autobiography, described meeting his own double on a road outside Strasbourg. By the late 19th century, neurologists in Berlin, Vienna, and Paris were using the term to describe a specific class of patient experience. A vivid hallucination of one's own body, perceived externally, often accompanied by a sense that the double was a separate person with its own mind. The word was not a metaphor anymore. It was the closest available label for a phenomenon their patients kept reporting, that the existing clinical vocabulary could not name. Number 7. In 1980, the British psychiatrist Joachim Damas Mora and 2 colleagues published a paper in the British Journal of Medical Psychology titled, simply, On the Doppelganger Phenomenon. The paper proposed something modest, but important. The phenomenon, they argued, should be defined narrowly, as the experience of duplication of one's real self, without further qualification, not the felt presence of another being, not the out-of-body sensation of looking down at one's own body. A specific, visual, externalized perception of one's own duplicate, encountered as if it were another person in the room. With this narrow definition, Damas Mora and his colleagues cataloged the cases that had appeared in the medical literature up to that point. They found that the phenomenon clustered around a small number of conditions: temporal lobe epilepsy, acute psychosis, migraine, severe sleep deprivation. They did not propose a unified mechanism. They concluded that the phenomenon was real, was clinically distinct, and was, at that time, unexplained. Number 6. In October 1989, the neurologist Devinsky and his colleagues published a paper in the Archives of Neurology. It is one of the foundational case series in the field. The paper reported 10 patients of their own, all with documented epilepsy, all of whom had experienced autoscopic phenomena during seizures. Devinsky and his team then reviewed 33 additional cases that had appeared in the medical literature since the late 19th century, 43 cases in total. The pattern was striking. In the great majority, seizures originated in the temporal lobe, often the right temporal lobe specifically. Some patients saw a static double. Others saw a double that moved independently, gestured, even spoke. A few patients reported being aware that they were inside their own body and inside their double simultaneously. Devinsky and his team did not solve the mechanism. What they did conclusively was establish that autoscopic phenomena were not folklore, not malingering, not psychosis. They were a reproducible neurological symptom of measurable seizure activity. After 1989, the field had a starting point. Number 5. The case from the opening. In 1994, Peter Brugger and his colleagues at the University Hospital of Zürich published in the journal Cortex a single, detailed case. A young man with complex partial seizures of temporal lobe origin. During one episode, he experienced autoscopy. He saw an exact replica of himself externally. The double appeared distressed. The double appeared to be leaving. The patient, in his disoriented state, came to a specific conclusion. If his double left without him, he would cease to exist. He went to the window of his apartment on an upper floor and attempted to jump after it. He survived the fall, was treated, and recovered enough to describe the episode in detail to his neurologists. The paper is titled, in the published version, Autoscopy, Epilepsy and Suicide. Brugger and his colleagues used the case to argue that the boundary between perceiving a double and identifying with that double can collapse during seizure activity. The reasoning that links self to body, in a moment, breaks. Number 4. In 1991, the German psychiatrist Hans Förstl, working with Osvaldo Almeida and Adrian Owen, published in the journal Psychological Medicine a systematic review titled On Misidentification Syndromes. They surveyed 260 cases in the literature. Most involved the broader family of delusional misidentification syndromes, including Capgras, in which a patient becomes convinced that a familiar person has been replaced by an exact replica. A subset of the 260 cases involved the inverse experience, the patient becoming convinced that they themselves had a double. The Förstl review accomplished something specific. It demonstrated that no single brain region accounted for these phenomena. Some cases involved frontal lobe damage, some temporal lobe, some parietal. Some had no detectable structural lesion at all. The review concluded that misidentification syndromes were a behavioral final pathway. Many possible upstream causes. One shared experience downstream. The implication, 3 decades later still mostly intact, is that the brain has more than one way to produce the experience of a double. Number 3. In 2006, Peter Brugger and a team that now included the Swiss neurologist Olaf Blank, working between Zürich and the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, published a case in Cortex. A 41-year-old man. He saw, simultaneously, 5 copies of himself. The clinical term for this is polyopic autoscopy. It is exceptionally rare. Brugger's review of the existing medical literature found only 14 previous published cases. The patient's brain was imaged. The cause was identified, a tumor in the insular region of his left temporal lobe. The insula is a small fold of cortex buried deep in the lateral fissure of the brain. It integrates signals from the body, heart rate, gut sensations, the position of the limbs, the feeling of being someone located in a specific body at a specific moment. When the insula is disrupted, this integration can fragment. Brugger and Blanke argued that polyopic autoscopy was the dramatic visible end of that fragmentation. 5 doubles, all the patient's own, none of them him, and yet all of them also him. Number 2. In 2013, the Swiss neuroscientists Lukas Heydrich and Olaf Blanke published a paper in the journal Brain. They had assembled 9 patients with documented autoscopy, each with a structural brain lesion identifiable on imaging. They applied a method called voxel-based lesion symptom mapping. The method asks, in effect, where do the lesions of these patients overlap? The answer was specific: the left posterior insula. Across the 9 cases, despite varying lesion shapes and sizes, the affected tissue converged on this one small region. The insula again, specifically the left posterior portion of it. Heydrich and Blanke argued that this region in healthy brains is responsible for binding internal bodily signals into a unified sense of self-location. When the left posterior insula fails, the brain produces a coherent body and a coherent self, in two places at once. The patient is in their physical body. And the patient is also somewhere across the room, watching themselves. The 2013 paper did not close the question, but for the first time, the field had a precise piece of cortex to interrogate. Before we continue, if this is the kind of investigation you came here for, consider subscribing. 3 videos a week, always with verifiable sources. Number 1. The most recent case and the most disturbing. In 2022, a team of Italian forensic psychiatrists led by Cristiano Barberi at the University of Pavia, with collaborators in Genoa, Turin, and Bari, published in the journal Forensic Sciences Research. The case concerned a 30-year-old man, identified in the paper only as Mr. Y. He had been stabbed to death. The man who killed him, identified as Mr. X, had no prior psychiatric history. Mr. X's first psychotic episode produced, as one of its symptoms, a doppelganger experience. He became convinced that Mr. Y was literally his double, not a person who looked like him, his own self, somehow externalized into another body. The fear, well documented in the older clinical literature, that the double will absorb or replace the original self, became, in Mr. X's perception, an immediate physical threat. The Italian team argued that this case sat at the intersection of two well-described categories: the Damas Mora narrow definition of the doppelganger phenomenon, and the broader Capgras-related family of delusional misidentification syndromes. Their conclusion was sober. The phenomenon, in extreme presentations, is dangerous. The brain mechanism, more than 2 centuries after Jean-Paul named the experience, is still not understood well enough to predict who will progress to violence and who will not. 8 cases, 2 centuries of medical literature. The clinical name has stabilized. Autoscopic phenomena. The most striking subtype, autoscopy, the encounter with one's own double, has been reproduced in seizure activity, in tumor patients, in stroke, in first episode psychosis. The lesion mapping work points with increasing confidence to the left posterior insula and the temporoparietal junction. But the field is not closed. Most patients with insular damage do not see a double. Most patients with temporal lobe epilepsy do not see a double. The neurology tells us where, but not why. And it does not tell us at all what happens in a healthy brain in the rare moments when an otherwise unremarkable person reports the same experience. The gap is real. The literature is honest about it. Whatever the next decade of imaging produces, the question that Jean-Paul named in 1796 is still, in a precise medical sense, open. Thank you for staying until the end. The next investigation is already in production. Until then, sit with the question. Sometimes it's more useful than the answer.